Drinking wine Chase the moonlight fire, yeah. Together we can fake our own death, yeah. Just wanna be alone and watch as you all just disappear. Oh no, just wanna be alone and watch. Or can't we be alone and watch? I had a dream last night. We drove out to see Las Vegas. We lost ourselves in the bright lights. I wish you could have seen us, begging for change to get home, or at least San Francisco. Let's put a 10 on the high card. I spent a summer on the West Coast. Down and to the light. Here's the map and the pen, the place you pointed at. California's back. All my high school life. And please don't tell me A little mistake without me. Or A-E-I-O-U. You can't spell pain or can't say run away. A little mistake without me. Or A-E-I-O-U. It's not at all unusual to melt like a ball of wax or
true dynamism of the pose. Yes, the arm is raised and the torso is leaning over. Yes, both legs are bent, but compare it to this drawing of the same pose. Hopefully you can see how stiff the drawing on the left now appears and how much more dynamic and energetic the drawing on the right appears. In the drawing on the right, I paid a lot of attention to the direction that the forms of the body were actually traveling. I was very careful not to stiffen the pose. Again, I cannot overstate how common it is for beginning figure drawing students to stiffen up poses and to draw them less dynamically than they actually are. As we talked about yesterday, my best guess is that there's a subconscious desire to stabilize poses that appear unstable or difficult to hold. Now let's take a look at an overlay of the basic directions that the parts of the body are going in the drawing on the left. Now let's compare it to the same kind of diagram placed over the more dynamic drawing on the right. Can you see the dramatic difference between how these two diagrams deal with the direction of the forms of the body? Let's take a look at the more stiff gestural diagram on its own. Now watch carefully as we shift to the more dynamic diagram derived from the more dynamic drawing. You can see that in this diagram, everything seems more extreme and dynamic. The diagonals are bolder and the angles are more acute. To sum up this point, a dynamic drawing begins with a dynamic gesture that accurately captures the true direction the forms of the body are going. It is all too common for beginning students to stiffen up their drawings. But by creating a light, linear, dynamic gesture drawing to figure out the true direction the forms of the body are traveling, we will ensure that when we build our drawing on top of it, it will carry the same dynamism with it through the end of the drawing. The final elements you need to understand in order to draw completed and truly dynamic gesture drawings are axis lines. To understand what axis lines are, let's take a look at a simple cylinder. There are actually two different kinds of axis lines that we use in figure drawing. The first kind of axis line runs through the center of a volume. It's a line around which the volume can rotate. The second kind of axis line, and the one we'll be using today, is called a transverse axis line. For our purposes in figure drawing, a transverse axis is a line that goes side to side between 2 points on either side of a volume. So in order to find and draw transverse axis lines on the figure, we first need to find pairs of points. Today we're going to be focusing on two of the most prominent axis lines used in figure drawing, the axis of the shoulders and the axis of the pelvis. Let's start with the axis for the shoulders. Although there are a few different ways you can find the axis line for the shoulders, it can often help to find a pair of points on the section of the body you're trying to find the axis for and run a line through them. So let me introduce you to a few very useful bony landmarks. A bony landmark occurs on the surface of the body when you can see a bone protruding underneath the skin. The two bony landmarks that are helpful when drawing the axis of the shoulders are the lateral ends of the clavicles. You can see them circled here. Now this isn't really an anatomy course, so it's not critical that you memorize all of the anatomical names of the landmarks we're talking about today. But depending on how seriously you want to take figure drawing, it can be useful to memorize all of the names of the landmarks we're talking about. So to help, here are a few ideas to keep in mind. You'll notice that we're referring to the lateral ends of the clavicles. When we use the word lateral in terms of anatomy, we're referring to forms of the body that are toward the sides of the body. This is as opposed to medial, which is toward the middle of the body. The clavicles, of course, have two ends, and we're only interested today in the ends of the clavicles that are near the sides of the body. The clavicles, of course, are the correct anatomical term for what people often refer to as the collarbones. In fact, you can easily find your clavicle with your fingers. Now take your fingers and slowly move them along the clavicle towards your shoulder. Notice that you can feel the end of the clavicle with your fingers. That's the lateral end of your clavicle. Now watch as I remove the circles. Can you still find the lateral ends of the clavicles? Now watch as I add the circles back in. Once you're confident you can find the lateral ends of the clavicles from the front, let's move to the back. The lateral ends of the clavicles are just as visible from the back as they are from the front. Can you see them? Let me circle them just to make sure. Were they where you thought they were? Watch as I remove the circles. Hopefully you can clearly see these two bony protrusions underneath the skin. These 2 points can serve as excellent landmarks when you're trying to figure out the axis of the shoulders. These 2 points are often, but not always, visible. Watch as the model raises her arms. You can see that right about where the lateral ends of the clavicles used to be, there are now creases in the skin created when the arms raise, but the lateral ends of the clavicles are still underneath. You can experience this happening in your own body. Once again, find the lateral end of one of your clavicles with your arm down. Slowly raise your arm and you can feel the lateral end of the clavicle disappear and become submerged as the muscles of the shoulder swell up around it. The higher the arms are raised, the deeper the creases get, and the more submerged the lateral ends of the clavicles become. If the lateral ends of the clavicles are visible, they're a great tool to find the axis line of the shoulders. But if they're not, we only need 2 corresponding points on the shoulders to figure out the axis line. These creases are a great alternative. As long as the points you're using to find the axis line of the shoulders are the same on either side, they'll give you an accurate axis line. Now let's move down to the pelvis. The bony landmarks that I find most useful to find the axis line of the pelvis are the anterior superior iliac spines. Or for short, people often refer to it as the ASIS or the ASIS. You can see the anterior superior iliac spines coming to the surface here and here. So let me dissect this anatomical term for you. Anterior refers to the front of the body, as opposed to posterior, which of course refers to the back. Superior means above, while inferior means below. The word iliac refers to the ilium, which are the large broad bones that form the upper part of the pelvis. And spine refers to the bony process that is visible just underneath the skin. Again, you don't need to memorize all of this yet. For now, it's more important that you understand the concept and are able to find these landmarks on the body. If you can see them, the anterior superior iliac spines are excellent tools to help us find the axis of the pelvis, but they can be difficult to see depending on the individual anatomy of the model you're working with. So let's practice finding them with a different pose. Hopefully you can already see the bones of the pelvis protruding from underneath the skin. It's located right here. Can you find the anterior superior iliac spine on the other side? Keep your eyes where you think it is. Did you get it right? Take a look once more without the circles. Once you're confident that you can see the anterior superior iliac spines, let's move to the back of the body. The landmarks we're looking for to help find the axis line of the pelvis from the back are the posterior superior iliac spines, or what you might hear referred to as the PSIS or the PSIS. You'll notice that with the exception of the word posterior, all of the rest of the words are the same as the anterior superior iliac spine. Again, it's not important that you memorize the vocabulary or that you even understand what the bones themselves look like. It's more important that you understand the concept and are able to find these bony landmarks on the surface of the body. When the body is upright, the posterior superior iliac spines actually appear as dimples. You can see them here and here. Now let's shift the pose. Can you still see them? Hopefully, you guessed that they were here and here. By connecting these 2 points, we can arrive at the axis line for the pelvis from the back. So let's put these ideas into use and start finding axis lines on actual poses. Let's start with the shoulders. Can you see the lateral ends of the clavicles? If not, let me help. They are here and here. Did you get it right? By connecting these points with a line, we have found the transverse axis line of the shoulders. In this next pose, let's try and find the axis of the pelvis. First, we need to locate the anterior superior iliac spines. Take a moment to find them. Did you get it right? Once you've found these bony landmarks, by connecting them with a line, you will have found the axis of the pelvis. Let's try finding the pelvic axis in one more pose. First, locate the anterior superior iliac spines. Next, connect them with a line. This will give you the axis of the pelvis. Now that you've got some practice, let's find both axis lines on the back of the body. Let's start with the shoulders. We can see that the arms are raised, which means we won't be able to clearly see the lateral ends of the clavicles, but as long as we find the same corresponding points on either side of the body, we can connect them to find the axis line of the shoulders. These two corresponding points will meet our needs. So for this pose, here is the axis of the shoulders. Now, let's move down to the pelvis. Can you find the dimples created by the posterior superior iliac spines? Is this where you thought they were? Let's connect these 2 points and extend the line outward to either side. This gives us the axis of the pelvis. Let's try this with one more pose. This time, let's start with the pelvis. First, we'll locate the posterior superior iliac spines and then extend a line through them to arrive at the axis of the pelvis. Now, the shoulder axis in this pose might be a bit of a challenge because both arms are raised and the hair of the model is covering the left shoulder. Nevertheless, we can approximate the axis of the shoulders by sending a line through the tops of both shoulders. Now that you've got some practice finding the axis lines of the pelvis and shoulders, let's put these ideas into practice by showing you how to integrate them into the gesture drawing process you've learned thus far. I'll start with a primary action line, just as I would encourage you to when you do your practice today.
I think I made that work. Yeah. That's pretty close. Let's see what he did.
My primary action line will move down the front of the torso, indicating that the rib cage is tilting back and that the pelvis is tilting forward, which raises up the backside, which I've tried to capture in this gesture line. From there, I'll start a new gesture line that moves down the front of the leg, capturing the curvature outward, before moving down to the lower part of the leg, which seems to be curving the opposite direction, creating a beautiful S-curve for the leg. I've even indicated the direction of the foot. Now I'll add the axis line for the shoulders by first finding the lateral ends of the clavicles and drawing a line indicating the connection between them. Notice how tilted it is. In your practice today, you'll want to make sure you're not stiffening up your gesture by drawing your axis lines more horizontal than they actually are. Next, I'll move to the pelvis. Hopefully you can see the anterior superior iliac spines protruding. Once again, we find that the axis line is at quite a dramatic angle. Finally, I'll draw the gesture for the other leg as well as the other foot. I know I've said this many times over the past 3 lessons, but it's critical for you to understand. We are not yet drawing the figure itself. In this kind of gesture drawing, we are essentially drawing a diagram that indicates what direction the various parts of the body are going and how they are placed in relationship to one another. If it helps, you can think of these lines as arrows to remind yourself that you're just drawing the direction that the parts of the body are going. You're not drawing the body itself. Hopefully you can also see that this kind of gesture drawing seems to capture a rhythm or a flow that moves through the entire figure. This kind of gesture drawing helps us think of the figure in its entirety, instead of looking at the figure as separate parts, a head, a torso, an arm, a leg. Doing a dynamic gesture like this helps us see how these forms flow into one another and operate as a whole. Next pose. Remember, a gesture line can flow wherever it needs to. It can.
How close did I get? I think okay. This was a little stiff. This was a little not exaggerated enough. He doesn't even draw the head. I want to keep drawing the head though. You can't tell me what to do. You can't control me. Free agent. I got proportions pretty close. Yeah, that's not bad. Oh, this one's kind of hard for this other leg. I'll see what he does. Yep. And here's my attempt. We'll see what he does.
Represent the outer contour of a form, cut through the middle, or anywhere in between. It's entirely up to you. In this pose, there seems to be a natural gesture line that starts at the raised elbow and flows down the right side of the torso. Next, I'll have this gesture line move up and to the left to show that the side of the pelvis on our left is raised up. Next, I'll place the axis lines. Hopefully you can see that the shoulder on our right is raised higher than the shoulder on our left. And after locating the anterior superior iliac spines, I'll draw the axis for the pelvis, which is higher on the left and lower on the right. As always, in a gesture drawing, if you need to make any adjustments, that's fine. Particularly when you're first starting out, you should expect that capturing the gesture and the axis lines might take multiple attempts. At this stage, there's no need to erase, just make the adjustments right over the lines you've already drawn. As I'm finishing up this simple gesture, hopefully you can see how well this simple diagram represents the pose. A good gesture is minimal but effective, and if done properly, will provide an armature upon which we can later build the volumetric forms of the body. You'll notice that I'm not actually drawing where the bony landmarks are. We're just using them to get the axis lines. So for now, there's no need to indicate in your drawing where exactly the anterior superior iliac spines are, or any of the other bony landmarks we've talked about. You just need to draw the axis lines. Let's do one more before we get you to your practice. This time, we'll work with the back view. Again, I'll begin at the raised elbow and draw a line that flows down the left side of the figure before moving over to the right side.
Yo, chill. Oh.
To capture the raise of the pelvis on these lines. So for now, there's no need to indicate in your drawing where exactly the anterior superior iliac spines are, or any of the other bony landmarks we've talked about. You just need to draw the axis lines. Let's do one more before we get you to your practice. This time, we'll work with the back view. Again, I'll begin at the raised elbow and draw a line that flows down the left side of the figure before moving over to the right side to capture the raise of the pelvis on the right. From there, I'll follow the right leg down to the foot, capturing the curves of the different parts of the leg on the way down. I've also drawn a small curved line to indicate where the heel comes in contact with the ground. Next, I'll draw the axis lines. Again, I'd like you to note how dramatically tilted they are, and that they're tilting in opposing directions. As I finish up this gesture, I'd like you to note again what an effective job this gesture does at communicating the basics of the pose. Again, a good gesture distills a pose down to its essence and communicates the dynamic forces of the figure in the most simplified and minimal way possible. Only by understanding the figure in this fundamental and dynamic way can we expect to do finished drawings that have a sense of dynamism and vitality.
I like mine more than his. His looks fucking weird.
So for today's practice, once again, you'll be drawing from 1-minute poses. Just like before, you're going to begin each pose with a primary action line. Next, you're going to draw gesture lines for the rest of the parts of the body, as well as axis lines for the shoulders and pelvis. Now remember, you don't have to actually draw in where the bony landmarks are in your gesture drawing. You just need to draw the axis line that they imply. Also, while you're practicing today, try and experiment with the order with which you draw these elements. So although most of the time I begin with a primary action line, sometimes I begin with axis lines. It really depends on the pose and the model. So if you're comfortable, see if you can explore and experiment to figure out what gesture process makes the most sense to you. Now this is the last lesson in which we're going to work with this kind of linear or diagrammatic gesture drawing. In the next lesson, you're actually going to start drawing forms of the body, starting with the torso. But it's really important to me that you understand the value of simplifying the body into these basic linear gesture drawings. Remember, these kinds of gesture drawings are going to lay the foundation upon which you will build the rest of your drawing. So you'll want to make sure you're accurately capturing the axis lines in the dynamic directions that the various parts of the body are going. This will ensure that our more finished drawings are as dramatic and as dynamic as the poses that they're drawn from. Well, good luck with your practice today, and I will see you back here for the next lesson when you're going to learn how to gesture the torso. 10 more seconds.
That's enough.
A modern concussion. The room is on fire. You're an upstanding model of the modern day king with impeccable style. So now you've done a little wrong and you need to be forgiven by the vicar and the company you keep. And then you conjure up a fiction to get the pretty girl to listen. This is that I will confess to release myself from
10 more seconds.
and everyone can tell. The moral objections to something so profane. Oh, but the deepest of convictions are the darkest positions, little remissions for the varicose vein. So now you've done a little wrong, and you swear you didn't do it, but militia left you burdened with a curse. And you conjure up a fiction to get the pretty girls to listen.
finished early. Go.
Ten more seconds.
Oh, cool, that was it. Last one. Ugh. Let's just see the next video. I don't know what else to do, so that out. The torso.
To understand the basic shapes of the torso, let's start off with a simple upright standing pose. The easiest way to think about the torso is as a two-chambered shape. There's an upper chamber that contains the rib cage, and a lower chamber that contains the pelvis. Let's first take a look at the shape that contains the rib cage. You'll notice that it's a vertically oriented oval. This makes sense as the rib cage itself is an ovoid shape. Now remember, this isn't an anatomy course, so we're not going to be discussing the specifics of the shape of the rib cage as a skeletal structure. Because we're trying to simplify the torso, for today we're going to be ignoring the breasts, the arms, and the shoulders. Take a moment to observe how this basic oval interacts with the forms of the upper body. Pay particular attention to where it leaves the edges at the side of the torso and moves inward toward the neck, leaving the arms and shoulders outside of the basic oval. Now let's take a look at the basic shape that contains the pelvis. You'll notice that from the front, it's much closer to a circle than the upper chamber containing the rib cage. Depending on the pose, both of these shapes can change, but for the most part, the upper chamber containing the rib cage will be a vertically oriented oval, while the lower chamber containing the pelvis will be a more horizontally oriented oval. To understand these shapes better, let's take a look at them together. The first thing I'd like you to notice is how the lower section of the upper chamber and the upper section of the lower chamber come together to form the indention at the waist. This indention is created in the space between the bottom of the ribcage and the top of the pelvis. Again, it's not important that you understand what these bones look like at this point. I just want you to have a very simple understanding of the basic shapes of the torso. The anatomical knowledge can come later. Before we move on, I'd also like you to notice that the bottom of the oval for the pelvis is located at the lowest portion of the pelvic region. I'd also like you to notice that the top of the oval for the ribcage goes well up into the neck. To better understand this, let's take a look at the figure from the back. We'll talk more about this later, but because the back of the neck is higher than the front of the neck, you can better see from the back why the oval for the ribcage goes as high as it does. Again, take a moment to see where the oval for the ribcage cuts through the figure, leaving out the arms and the shoulders, and how it interacts with the neck, particularly with the muscles at the sides of the neck. I'd also like you to note how the lower chamber cuts through the body, leaving out the legs, and that the bottom of the oval is at the bottom of the glutes. Finally, I'd like you to note that from the front and the back, during a basic upright standing pose, these two shapes are vertically aligned. Now let's take a look at this two-chambered shape from the side. The first thing I'd like you to notice is that generally speaking, the average human body is wider than it is deep. So you can see that from the sides, these two chambers appear to be narrower than they appear from the front view. Now let's take a look at just the lower section. You'll notice that its axis is no longer perfectly vertical. From the side, the oval is tipped. To help balance the body, you'll also notice that the oval for the ribcage is also tipped, but in the opposite direction. When taken together, hopefully you can see how well these basic shapes describe the simple shape of the torso. I'd like you to notice that once again, we need to ignore the breasts in order to understand this shape. Later on in this course, you'll learn how to attach the breast to the ribcage, but for now, we want to focus on the basic shapes of the torso in the most simple way possible. Moving forward, I want you to be able to understand this two-chambered shape in two different ways. First, it's essential to understand that it is made up of two different shapes: a vertical oval that contains the ribcage and a more horizontal oval that contains the pelvis. But as we bend and twist this shape, it's also important that you understand it as a single form. So starting at the indention at the waist, you'll see me remove the bottom section of the upper chamber and the top section of the lower chamber. This leaves us with a basic shape that looks like this. It's also critical that you understand how the axis lines for both the pelvis and the shoulders interact with this form. So here's the basic set of elements that we're going to be focusing on today. So let's see what happens when we shift the figure into a basic contrapposto pose, with the axis lines for the shoulders and the pelvis in counter position, and the shape for the torso bending. Hopefully you can see that the axis for the upper chamber is now tilted. Take a moment to observe how the oval for the upper chamber interacts with the upper section of the torso. Now take a look at the lower section of the torso. Hopefully you can see that it too is now tilted. Now let's simplify these two basic shapes into a single compound bending shape. As we do this, let's take a look to see how this new bending form is different from the simple upright shape. As the shape for the torso bends and the upper and lower chambers are at different angles, you can see that the indention at the waist, on our left, is now more extreme. As the torso bends, this side compresses, creating a deeper indention. On our right side, however, the angular indention has disappeared because this side of the body is now stretching. So on our left, we see the muscles of the torso contracting, pulling the left side of the ribcage down toward the left side of the pelvis. When this happens, we'll refer to this as the active side. On the right, the muscles for the torso must relax to accommodate for the muscular contraction we see on our left. With the muscles on the right side relaxed, the space between the ribcage and the pelvis can expand. When this happens, we'll refer to it as the passive side. So to sum up, the muscles on the active side, which is on our left, contract, pulling the ribcage and pelvis toward one another. This creates a greater indention on the active side. To accommodate, the muscles on the passive side, which is on our right, must relax. This allows them to stretch as the distance between the ribcage and pelvis on the passive side expands. When we combine the basic shape of the torso with axis lines for the shoulders and pelvis, we arrive at a descriptive, simplified form of the torso that will be incredibly useful as we move forward in the figure drawing process. Next, let's look at a more extreme example. In this pose, hopefully you can see that the active side of the figure is more compressed and the passive side is more stretched. See if you can visualize the two-chambered shape of the torso. Watch as I overlay the two basic shapes that will make up the compound form of the torso. How close is this to what you visualized? Now watch as I combine these two basic shapes into one single compound form for the torso. Hopefully you can see how well this shape describes both the compression of the active side and the stretching on the passive side. Finally, we'll add the axis lines, pulling together what you've learned today about the basic shape of the torso and what you learned in the previous lesson. Now that you have a basic introduction to the shape of the torso, let's show you how to draw it. First, I'll demonstrate how to draw the shape of the torso by breaking it down into its two basic shapes. I'll start by drawing a basic circle. It's important to remember that depending on the pose in the model, this shape will often be more ovular. Next, I'll draw the vertically oriented oval above it, making sure the two overlap. Next, I'll darken the outer contour of this shape using fluid strokes. This gives us the shape of the torso we'll be working with. Now watch as I draw a modified version of this shape with the active side on the right and the passive side on the left. You'll notice that I'm starting with the stretch of the passive side using a long fluid stroke before drawing the lower chamber. Next, I'll draw the top chamber, but here you'll see me use a shortcut. You'll notice I'm not drawing the complete oval. If it's helpful, you're welcome to start by drawing both of the shapes that the chamber of the torso is made up of before combining them into a compound shape by darkening the contour. Once you're comfortable and competent drawing these basic shapes, you can simplify the process by combining them together and only drawing the outer contour of the shape. You'll notice that I've actually drawn an overlap where the top chamber overlaps the bottom chamber on the active side of the torso. You'll also see me draw a slight concavity on the passive side as the skin stretches between the space below the ribcage and above the pelvis. When combined with the indention on the active side, we have a shape that will provide an excellent foundation for the torso as we move forward in the figure drawing process. Now watch as I demonstrate how to draw this shape a few more times. Here, you'll see me skip the two basic shapes that make up the compound form of the shape of the torso and go right to drawing the contour. Notice how fluid the line work is. Once I'm happy with my light drawing of the shape of the torso, I can draw in the slight concavity on the passive side, as well as the angular indentation and overlap on the active side. I use this shape in almost every figure drawing I do, as do many other master artists. You might hear different instructors refer to this shape in different ways. I've heard it referred to as a kidney, a bean, a peanut, but I like to think of it as a butternut squash. Just like the human body, butternut squashes come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. But, generally speaking, they all have the similar two-chambered arrangement, with the chamber on top being more vertically oriented and the chamber on the bottom being more horizontally oriented. The similarities between the human torso and a butternut squash can be striking. I often encourage students to practice drawing butternut squashes before they transition to figure drawing. For this next demonstration, I'm going to put a piece of tracing paper over a quick drawing that focuses on the torso. The unobscured drawing will remain on the left. To better understand the upper chamber of the shape of the torso we're working with today, you'll see me draw an ellipse where the cylinder of the neck joins with the top chamber of the torso. You don't need to draw this ellipse at your practice today, but I did want to explain this concept because it can be useful when trying to understand
I'm
the upper
doing it
chamber of the torso.
anyway.
You can
Fuck
think of this
you.
upper chamber, which contains the rib cage, as looping over the top of the ellipse for the neck. I'd also like you to notice where the sides of the upper chamber for the torso come to the surface on the sides of the figure itself, both on the active side, where we find the compression, and on the passive side, where the basic ovoid shape for the upper chamber of the torso runs alongside much of the outer edge of the figure before cutting in and moving toward the ellipse of the neck. You'll notice that the upper chamber is at a slightly tilted axis. Next, you'll see me lightly draw in the shape for the lower chamber. Notice how this basic shape comes to the surface on either side of the pelvic region, as well as where the bottom of this shape is, touching the lowermost point of the pelvis. Next, I'll draw on the axis lines for both the shoulders and the pelvis. In your practice today, you're going to begin by going through the same gestural process you've been learning over the past few lessons, but in today's practice, you'll include the shape of the torso. To show you what this should look like, I'll go ahead and finish up this gesture using the tracing paper. Just like you've seen me demonstrate many times, I'll start at the raised elbow on our right, and follow this line right down the outer edge of the torso. Next, I'll move to the side on our left by defining the lower portion of the shape of the torso, before moving up and to the left to indicate the raise of the pelvis on our left. You'll see me use this strategy in many gestures. From here, I'll move down the leg on our left side, indicating where the knee is, as well as the direction of the lower portion of the leg. Next, I'll indicate the direction of the leg on our right. Notice that for both legs, the gesture line moves along the outermost contour of the leg. This helps define the width of the overall figure. I've also drawn a quick, simple shape for the foot. I'll apply the same strategy to the arm on our left before indicating the tilt of the head with a single directional line. When we remove the original drawing from underneath, we're left with an excellent example of the kind of gesture drawing I'd like you to produce today. Now let's finish today's lesson with some demonstrations.
Yo, hold
Just like
on.
you saw
Hold on,
demonstrated
I
with
wasn't
the tracing
done.
paper, I'll begin this to remove the original drawing from underneath. We're left with an excellent example of the kind of gesture.
Chill, bro. Alright, now that I'm not distracted, this has to. Fuck man, I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, let's see what the hell he said here.
Leg. This helps define the width of the overall figure. I've also drawn a quick, simple shape for the foot. I'll apply the same strategy to the arm, the torso. Just like you've seen me demonstrate many times, I'll start at the raised elbow on our right, and follow this line right down the outer edge of the torso. Next, I'll move to the side on our left by defining the lower portion of the shape of the torso, before moving up and to the left to indicate the raise of the pelvis on our left. You'll see me use this strategy in many gestures. From here, I'll move down the leg on our left side, indicating where the knee is, as well as the direction of the lower portion of the leg. Next, I'll indicate the direction of the leg on our right. Notice that for both legs, the gesture line moves along the outermost contour of the leg. This helps define the width of the overall figure. I've also drawn a quick, simple shape for the foot. I'll apply the same strategy to the arm on our left before indicating the tilt of the head with a single directional line. When we remove the original drawing from underneath, we're left with an excellent example of the kind of gesture drawing I'd like you to produce today. Now let's finish today's lesson with some demonstrations. Just like you saw demonstrated with the tracing paper, I'll begin this gesture with a raised arm on our right and move down the side of the torso, before moving to the raised hip on the left side of the body, and then following the outer contour of the left leg down to the foot. Now you'll see me lightly gesture in the two basic shapes for the torso.
Okay. Hold on now, hold on now. So he goes there, need a bigger brush. It goes.
Starting with the more vertically oriented oval of the upper chamber before drawing the lower chamber. This is just my first attempt. I'm almost certain that they will need to be adjusted as the drawing evolves. With each adjustment that I make, I'm drawing with a slightly darker line. Now watch as I draw an overlap where the lower chamber comes in front of the upper chamber, as well as the slight concavity on the passive side. Next, I'll add in the axis lines for the shoulders and pelvis, before indicating the directions of the arms, as well as the direction of the foreshortened leg on our right.
Okay, so it's like that kinda, and then
I'm making sure to indicate the inner curves of the leg. I'll finish this gesture by indicating the direction of the feet, as well as an indication of the tilted head. In this next drawing, you'll see me change up the order.
bro, slow down. Slow the fuck down.
Indicating the directions of the arms, as well as the direction of the foreshortened leg on our right. I'm making sure to indicate the inner curves of the leg.
Good job. Proud of you. Alright, goddamn.
I'll finish this gesture by indicating the direction of the feet, as well as an indication of the tilted head. In this next drawing, you'll see me change up the order of the steps. After drawing a primary action line that runs down the side of the figure on our right, I'll immediately add the axis lines for the shoulders and the pelvis. Remember, there's no single correct way to draw the figure. Now you'll see me make my first attempt at the shape for the torso. As I'm doing this, I'm paying particular attention to where the active and passive sides are in relation. In this next drawing,
I'm getting bored. I do want to finish this though.
You'll see me change up the order of the steps. After drawing a primary
Oh.
action line that runs down the
My dumbass still had it on 1.5 times speed. No wonder it was too goddamn fast.
side of the figure on our right, I'll immediately add the axis lines for the shoulders and the pelvis of the leg. I'll finish this gesture by indicating the direction of the feet as well as an indication of the tilted head. In this next drawing, you'll see me change up the order of the steps. After drawing a primary action line that runs down the side of the figure on our right, I'll immediately add the axis lines for the shoulders and the pelvis. Remember, there's no single correct way to draw the figure. Now you'll see me make my first attempt at the shape for the torso. As I'm doing this, I'm paying particular attention to where the active and passive sides are in relationship to one another. I'm also paying attention to the axis of each of the chambers of the shape of the torso. When you're practicing today, it's important to remember that it's much more important to accurately capture the sides of the shape of the torso, because they can be directly observed. If you're not entirely sure exactly where the top or bottom of the shape of the torso is, that's okay. You'll learn much more about this shape as the course goes on. Remember, this is your first attempt and you're just practicing. Once the directions of the legs and feet have been indicated, you'll see me refine and darken the shape of the torso. I'd like you to notice that with each refinement, I've leaned the upper chamber of the torso more and more toward the left. You can see evidence of this in the previous lines. Now I'll finish up the gesture by adding the overlap in the indention on the active side of the torso, as well as the arm on our right, the shoulder on our left, and I'm just going to give a slight indication of the shape of the head. In this final demonstration, you'll see me draw the shape of the torso
Hey, I
from
wasn't
the chamber of
done.
the torso more and more toward the left. You can see evidence of this in the previous lines. Now I'll finish up the gesture by adding the overlap in the indention on the active side of the torso, as well as the arm on our right, the shoulder on our left, and I'm just going
Skipping
to give
ahead,
a
he's fucking
slight
time-lapsing,
indication
dude.
of the shape of the head.
I'm trying to follow along here. Asshole.
In this final demonstration, you'll see me draw the shape of the torso from the side. You'll see me start with the curve of the back before shifting to the front of the leg. Next, I'll lightly draw the two shapes that make up the different chambers of the torso, paying particular attention to how they're tilted. Once they're established, I'll gesture in the directions of the rest of the parts of the body. As you watch me finish this gesture drawing, that make a slight. Next, I'll lightly draw the two shapes that make up the different chambers of the torso, paying particular attention to how they're tilted.
Yeah, because it's a side view. Back. It's a good one, bitch.
Once they're established, I'll gesture in the directions of the rest of the parts of the body. As you watch me finish this gesture drawing, there's one thing I'd like to make very clear. In your drawings today, the torso should be the only part of the body drawn with a closed shape. The rest of the body should
Yes, ma'am.
simply be indicated with directional lines. The directional lines will often imply shapes, and that's fine. But the torso is the only shape you should be drawing so far. You'll learn how to draw the shapes of the rest of the forms of the body later on in this course. With all of this in mind, let's get you to today's practice. Today's practice has two parts. First, I'd like you to practice drawing the shape of the torso on its own, just like I demonstrated, before applying it to the actual figure. Make sure you're using light, fluid strokes. I'd like you to do a minimum of 25 drawings of the shape of the torso in various positions. Once you're comfortable drawing the shape of the torso, move to the Lesson 4 practice reel. In today's practice reel, you'll be drawing from 2-minute poses. That's twice as long as the poses in your previous practice reel. For your practice drawings today, you'll go through the same process you saw me demonstrate. Your drawing should start with a basic linear gesture that indicates the directions of the various parts of the body, and also include axis lines for the shoulders and pelvis, and the shape of the torso that you learned how to draw today. Just like in the previous lesson, feel free to experiment with the order of the steps to see what works best for you. If you're feeling ambitious and wanting to practice more, here's a bonus challenge for you. Once you've gone through today's practice reel, try and do the exact same exercise from today using the 1-minute poses in the practice reel for Lesson 3. These shorter poses will help sharpen your skills and challenge you to increase your efficiency when drawing. But if you're not up for that, that's totally fine. Well, good luck with your practice today, and I will see you back here for the next lesson when you're going to learn how to turn this basic torso shape into a volumetric form by adding a center line.
Whoa, no way. Alright, I guess I'll draw some torsos. 25 of them.
Life is but a dream from the dead. And when I won't go down by myself, but I go down with my friends. Now, 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 now. Now, now, now. Now, now, now. Ow, 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 ow.
I can take that TISM test as many times as you want. It's not going to show anything different. I'm gonna pull up some references because I can't come up with nothing else here. Unfortunately, I can't let you see because there's boobs and vajayjay on display here. So you just have to trust me that I'm doing everything correctly and perfectly. First try.
Thank you, and thank you again. He was the congregation's vagrant with an unrequited love. When your passion's exaltation, then finding refuge is not enough. She was the youngest of the family.
Why is it harder? Reference.
They decided they would try and make it on their own. Oh, memories, where'd you go? You were all I've ever known. How I miss yesterday, and I let it fade away. Where'd you go? When July became December, their affection fought the cold, but they couldn't quite remember what
Oh,
inspired.
here's two of them. Yeah, I don't have to pull up another picture.
And it was beautifully depressing, like a streetcar named Desire. They were fighting for their love that started growing tired. Oh, memories, where'd you go? You were all I've ever known. How I miss you.
I wouldn't know. I cheat my way through any hands I draw. But yeah, hands are difficult. Wow. I'm afraid you're out of hope then, my friend. I'm sorry.
Money lost momentum, and the bills were piling high. Then the smile had finally faded from the apple of their eye. And they were young and independent, and they thought they had it planned. Should have known right from the start, you can't predict the end. Oh, memories, where'd you go? You were all I've ever known. How I miss yesterday.
That's 12 after you're 25. Thanks, dude. Yeah, that's my girlfriend. She goes to another school. You don't know her. That's right, dude. This album fucking slaps. wrist is starting to hurt a little bit, so I'm just gonna do this last practice reel and then I'll be done for the day, I think. Gotta look out for my health, you know? Do a little stretch here. Yeah, normally I don't use my wrist very much when I'm drawing because it's not good to do, but for these I was. Usually I use my shoulder. Okay. How long is this practice reel? The last one was like 16 minutes. I took a little longer than that because I'm slow, but 19 minutes. And we'll see how it goes.
When I see your face, it's like I hit rewind.
You're gonna hear like 10 seconds left quite a few times.
Sweet Caroline, I wanna put you on like a 45.
What'd they do? Nice, dude.
I cut my ear up to stop listening. I'm missing moments of life. I'm feeling dizzy.
We didn't even have like DoorDash or Uber Eats here. Not that I would use it anyway, because I'm fucking broke as shit. And I already eat out too much. Like 20 minutes probably, however long this reel takes to finish.
Ten more seconds.
I never.
In my youth,
I was thinking it's that song, and it's
the
not.
earth move underneath my feet. I knew my place and kept time blissfully out of arm's reach. But time takes us all and makes fools of the beggars, hardens all hearts with desired endeavors, shell games, all routine and ripples. I grew tired of hiding in the shelter I built, small empty promises and traces of scent. I built it all up for so long. It was only a matter of when I'd find out I was wrong and learn to let go.
10 more seconds.
You can send me some on Discord if you want, and I can look at them later. I'm gonna get some dinner after this, though, I think. Getting hungry. And this is a gesture drawing. You would build on top of this with, like, 3D forms and then anatomy on top of that. If you start with like boxes and shit and cylinders, it has a tendency to get really stiff. So you start with this, which is like real flowy and loose, so that you can build on top of it, and it'll solidify as you do that. Think of it like a wireframe that you like stick clay on top of, is a good analogy. And I'll probably have some meatballs. I got meatballs and garlic mashed potatoes.
I was told I could be anything I not right.
Try and draw smaller. I'm gonna run out of room.
It's what you need. Now my past is not the residence I choose to reside in. My future's just a context, ephemeral, implied. It's not you, it's not me. cause I'm not everything I thought that I was. Wish I had it in me to stop, but I can't give fuck. I'm distant, I'm passive, unavailable and
Oh, well, thank you.
10 more seconds.
I need everyone to stop acting. I'm so past it, so I'm passing on everything that you're passing. I'm trying to make something that'll last.
And let me find that video. Copy link, bitch. It's 20 minutes, so I'm not gonna watch it on here, but I'll link it for you. I want it.
This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the
Squarespace
website builder.
Yeah. Love Squarespace.
Reason I should chill on my own, so alone. I can't tell if this is real. Someone pinch me, wake up. Someone's help me to get up. Someone pinch me, come get me, come help, 'cause it's too much, no.
Oh, last pose. Let's go.
Rent. I'm running out of patience. I'm trying hard, but it don't make sense. It's like I'm half asleep, like I'm living in a dream. Feels like everything I see is just so slightly out of reach. It's like I'm half awake, barely getting through the day. Feels like everything I say don't come out the right way, yeah. But I can't keep up, can't sit still. There's no reason I should chill on my own, so alone. I can't tell if this is real. Someone pinch me, wake up. Someone's help me to get up. Someone pinch me, come get me, come help, 'cause it's too much, no. Whoa, you're alive. Do you ever really stop and wonder why? Is your soul
10 more seconds.
by the tiny twinkling light inside your eyes? Whoa,
老师好，生活。现在我有冰淇淋，我很喜欢冰淇淋。
with your regrets to just get high. Feels bad, man, the up and down and the emotion broke my loaded hands. Place my legs with sleeping bags. They make me smoke 50 grams. When I open a mandible clip, I stand in a standard. You can't touch my precious glow. When I don't care about answers, no. Tell yourself a story. Life is pretty boring. See you in the morning. Let your worries drown. Like chlorine, keep the liquor pouring. Up until you're soaring. Let your heroes down. I think I've seen enough, but I hope this trip would come and save me.
I don't know what that was supposed to be.
Enough, so I scratch this itch. Hardcore's a
All right, I'm done for now.
step the organ and play through. Time blows the horn in my chest, the born in my chest, the play that I can do. Brain, bramming through a sea of bats. They're nipping chords and spinning words of
All right, cool. I'll watch them later tonight.
my stupid
See ya.